Education in the United States has a history full of twists and turns. Students with disabilities were highly unincluded in K-12 schools until recently. The Education for All Handicapped Children Act of 1975 was passed by a judge who gave students with disabilities the legal right to go to school. Prior to that, students did not have the legal right to go to school if they had a documented disability. But even though students with disabilities now had the right to go to school, this did not mean they went to school with other kids. They were in segregated school settings or classrooms. This was until the 1970s and 80s when mainstreaming became more prevalent in schools. Mainstreaming is when students with disabilities are in classrooms and schools with students without disabilities. Since around the 2000s, inclusive education has increased immensely. Inclusive education is where you have many different types of teaching situations which allow for students with and without documented disabilities to be taught together in an inclusive classroom. Inclusive education is something that you see more often now in elementary schools, middle schools, and high schools. But what happens after high school? Many students with disabilities have to leave school after age 21. At that point, they have three main options of what to do. The options they're left with include going to a segregated day hab, which is like a continuation of a self-contained classroom, perhaps, and there may be some community elements. Another option would be joining the job market. And a third option would be going to a post-secondary inclusive education program, which is basically like going off to college. It has been found that for both students with and without disabilities, where the student ends up after high school depends a lot on teacher and parent mindset and expectations for that student. Teacher and parent mindset and expectations can be formed through many different aspects of their lives. One main aspect that can impact their expectations especially is their knowledge of different things pertaining to their students. Knowledge of things like opportunities. Do they know that there's an opening at a store nearby? Do they know that there is an opening in a program, either a day hab program or a post-secondary inclusive education program? Knowing that could influence their expectations for their student. Knowledge of options for their student is also important. Do they know the three options that students with disabilities may have after graduating high school? That they could go to a day hab or a segregated area, that they could join the job force, that they could go to college. Another important aspect of knowledge is knowing the student's capabilities. Do they think it is possible for their student to join the job force? Have they seen students with similar disabilities in the past succeed in a job like that? Do they have knowledge of past successes for students with that disability? If they haven't seen it, they might not think it is possible. And lastly, and possibly most important, are knowledge of resources. Do teachers and parents know where they can find all of that other information? Do they know someone who can help them through the process of transition? When thinking about disability and thinking about outcomes of either schooling or programs or employment for individuals with different disabilities, it's important to think about the implications of inequities and intersectionality of disability with other marginalized identities. So, what are some of these inequities when thinking about disability? Well, in the K-12 school demographics, the U.S. Department of Education shows that 48% of students in schools K through 12 today are white and 15% of them are black. But when you look at the total number of students with disabilities who are classified in K-12 schools, 14% of them are white and 16% of them are black. This shows a disproportionate amount of black students being diagnosed with disabilities, where there is a much smaller amount of students being diagnosed who are white. There have also been similar trends shown for students who are of Hispanic descent, being diagnosed with disabilities at a higher rate than would be anticipated based on statistics. It also should be noted that students with intellectual disabilities have been shown to be less likely to have post-secondary goals that include going on to college or other types of education. When you connect this with the disproportionate amount of students who are of marginalized identities who are classified with disabilities, this could be why there are less students, percentage-wise, who are black attending colleges and post-secondary education programs than students who are white. That specific data is not even taking into account disability or lack of classification of a disability. Some of the reasoning behind why there's a lower likelihood of students with intellectual disabilities striving to go to college is because there's a lack of expectation or presumption of competence that they will succeed in a college environment. Another area of inequity when looking at inclusive post-secondary education programs is that 1/3 of all the programs are in 3 states, including California, Florida, and New York. This means that if you live in a state that does not have an abundance of these programs, it is much less likely you would have the opportunity to send your student to one of these programs. This is important to know because it has been shown through research that by attending one of these post-secondary education programs, students are more likely to find employment, have success with independent living, and possibly have higher levels of self-fulfillment. So today I'm going to share with you some possible solutions to help reduce these inequities. These solutions include research and reach out. There needs to be more research into the aspects of intersectionality with these post-secondary programs. There also should be more research into what makes a program successful and what are the outcomes that students want from a program. Researchers and advocates also need to reach out to different groups and get information to them so they know the opportunities available. This, I believe, is the most important solution of the two. Specifically, I am envisioning employers and programs learning about how their program or their company can utilize these individuals. I think students and teachers and parents should be brought in at a much earlier time than 15 or 16 to start thinking about transition. This way, they know what opportunities they can pursue and can plan for them early on. I also think that these ways of communicating need to be in accessible language and in accessible formats, which would allow for a wider range of communities to benefit from the information. With these solutions, more and more students will know that they have the option of going to college and will therefore be able to make a more educated decision on what they are going to do after high school.